Lama Michel Rinpoche very often reminded us the importance of our spiritual path, through a phrase, just very simple, which sums up a lot of things. He reminded us that the inner peace is the most solid foundation for peace in the world. The importance for each of us to be in peace with ourselves and, as a consequence, in peace with the world, in order to be able to live in peace with others. Because all the conflicts that we have at work, in society, and national level, international, etc., where they're born? In the mind, and then in the words and actions of human beings. But where I wanted to go today is when we say inner peace is the most solid foundation for world peace, you say, well, now what do I do? It's not. It's a bit like there's a danger that we become like Kung Fu Panda, where he sits there. He's very peaceful, then something happens and then he gets angry. I don't know if you can remember that scene. Of all the films that I've seen until now, Kung Fu Panda is one of the best Buddhist films ever. I'm talking at the level of concepts, the way it transmits Buddhist thought is much better than a lot of other films that say they're Buddhist. Anyway, apart from all that, what happens is, how can I do it? And here there are many aspects. One of them is and here we can remind ourselves to use our senses in a peaceful way, to look with peace, speak with peace, touch with peace, etc. And in old, ancient Tibetan traditions, Wangabo Tampa in Tibetan, protect the doors of our senses, because deep down we want to have peace in our mind, not the conceptual part, but also in our sentiments. And which conditions our mind are our senses. What I see, what I hear, what I say, places I go to, situations I find myself in, people I meet, what I do in my life, the contact I have with the world that surrounds me has an enormous influence on my state of peace. Therefore, one of the most important things for us is, first of all, is to recognize our own fragility. What are our weak points? And here there are two examples that I lived through with two of my masters in India. One of them, Genlapa, and with the first one with Geshe Rinpoche, there was some teachings of the Dalai Lama. It was a huge Gompa with 3,000 people inside, but on that occasion there were 6,000, sorry. In this situation, and my master, he was the master of all the. He never wanted an important title like abbot, even though he had a very important role. When he was supposed to have they wanted to appoint him as abbot, but then he escaped and left a letter. I won't come back until I'm sure that you won't make me abbot. So he was determined not to have an official title. When there were teachings, in this case, there's a very strict hierarchy in terms of seating, where people are seated. Those nearest the altar are the abbots, ex-abbots, the most important masters, etc. And every time, even though he didn't have an official title, the Dalai Lama personally called him. He really wanted him to sit near him and personally called him at the front. But he sat outside with the lay people next to a speaker under an umbrella, way outside. And I asked him why. If you're near, it's not as hot. The tea, when you get the tea, it's still hot. You can see the Dalai Lama. It's nicer. And he answered, the higher you are, the more it hurts when you fall. And then he said, I'm there. I go there to receive teachings and to concentrate on the teachers, not to concentrate on who's sitting where. I know my weaknesses. If I'm at the front, one part of my mind will say, oh, I shouldn't be here. What will that one be thinking of me? I'm special because the Dalai Lama asked me to sit here. A small part of the mind starts with that dialogue. And he said, to protect myself, I don't even go there. What does that mean? To know your own weakness and say, okay, I'm not going to create the conditions where a part of myself would be cultivated that I don't want it to be. Another time, Genlapa, I gave him a present. Another master. I came from Italy, and I brought 2 pairs of socks for him. I've told this story so many times, but it left a big mark on me. 2 pairs of socks. Nice cotton. A special Italian cotton fiber called filo di Scozia. So he was somebody who got the highest marks in his studies. But when he finished studying, the abbot asked him, to teach, and he said, I can't teach what I haven't understood. So he started teaching the kids to read and write. Then he worked in the administration offices. Until the last moment, the last 2 years, he was in retreat. The rest of his life he worked. He used to get up at 3 o'clock and did his practice until 6 o'clock. And then 6 o'clock he had breakfast, and 7 he was working, and then he came back home around 5 o'clock in the evening, listened to the news, and then he did his practice, and then went at 9 o'clock he went to sleep. But I saw that he was going up and down the stairs, and I saw that his socks had holes in them. So I brought him these pair of socks. And he looked at me. Now what do I do? And he liked joking. I said, Genla, let's just try and make a relationship. Shoes, feet, socks. Can we connect them? He said, I've already got 2 pairs of socks. So he showed me. Okay, so he showed. Okay, so he showed me his bed, which was showed me his feet in his bed, which was unmade according to a Tibetan tradition, which is only made when you're about to die. So he pulled back the carpet on his bed, showed me his feet. I myself developed a technique when I rolled up the bedding. In a very lazy way, I rolled up all the bedding so that in the evening I would just have to unroll it. Genlapa, he pulls up the carpet on the bed and he showed me, these are the clean pair and these are what I'm wearing. But I said, your socks are really old, the elastic's worn out. And then you keep it up with an elastic, which is not bad, which is not good for your circulation. He used to put the very thick elastic on that you use for paper, so he had these signs on his legs. These are much nicer, and I spoke about the quality of Italian socks. He said, okay, thanks. The next day, I saw other monks with their socks on. And talking to him, let me just make a summary. He was a man of few words, but why didn't he keep the socks? Not because he didn't like them, because he didn't want to accept my gift. It wasn't because of that. It was because there's a difference between what I like and what I need. And he said, if 2 socks for me are enough, that would. But if I allow myself to have a 3rd pair, then I'll need a 4th, 5th, 6th pair. So every time I need a pair of socks, I won't know which to take. So he had 2 socks. He was very clear. I know what the mind's like. The more I have, the more I need. And if I allow myself to go beyond my need, which is already covered, at that point, I leave space to I want. If I give victory to I want, there's no end to it. Once I was renovating the house in the monastery, and everything started by chance because of the bathroom. The bathroom. Okay, there wasn't a shower. We had to wash yourself with a bucket, but that's okay. The main problem was the pipe was very, very small, so everything flooded, and the pipe went straight down into the courtyard where the monks ate. So you could only have the shower at certain times. So anyway, I changed the tube, and I saw that. I said, okay, well, seeing as I've changed the pipe, let me make the shower and then put up the tiles. And I started changing things, and I said, okay, we've done the bathroom. I said, what about the kitchen? There was a tiny little sink for the bathroom. You couldn't even put a plate in. So I changed the sink. And where the pots and pans was an open cupboard where the rats used to go into. And then I went into and then I started fixing this, that, and the other in the living room. And there were nice episodes. One of them is, I said, Genla, let's change the table in the living room. And he said, why? I said, because it's a table, 8 people, but only 4 people can sit at this table. Because 2 legs were broken, and it had to be supported against 2 walls. Come on, let's change the table, I said. And he said, why? Because there's this problem. And he said, how many times are there more than 4 of us eating at the table? I said 2 or 3 times of the year. So he said, what do we do? So what do we do? He said, we go into your bedroom and there's a nice long table there. He said, are we okay when we're there? I said, sure. And he said, well, why do we have to change the table then? And I didn't have an answer. And there were many episodes, and he said, just listen to this. Whatever you want to do, that you think is necessary, you should know that I'm here to help you. But remember, but the more I want, the more I need. It's never, desire has no end. Now I realized I was better off when I was happy with how things were, rather than started doing lots of things, making so many changes. I started thinking, oh, the parquet, it would be nice if we had parquet instead of tiles. And I entered into a process of dissatisfaction. So I took a decision. So I left a part unfinished to remind myself that you never satisfied all your desires. So I left it purposely unfinished. But what I want to say is that when you recognize your weakness, you protect yourself until that weakness is no longer there. If I have a wound on my arm and I walk through crowds, I'm very careful not to bump into people. But if I realize, for example, I get angry easily, I'm dissatisfied because I have a sense of superiority or arrogance, and we see that there are conditionings that we've had. One of the things to do is to protect ourselves from our own weaknesses. I know I have this weakness, and I try to avoid to go through certain experiences and do certain things where I can't stop myself, and I fall into the trap, and I reinforce this weakness. I don't like sitting there because I know my mind. I don't want to feed that tendency. I don't take a third pair of socks, not because there's anything wrong with that, but just because I know that the more I have, the more I want. And I recognize that I'm happy with what I have, and I don't, because the more I manage to get, the more dissatisfaction grows. It's strange, but that's true. When we want something, in reality, it's not the object in itself, it's the sense of pleasure once you've obtained the object and you've had that pleasurable feeling, it passes, and then you want another object and another and another. And it never finishes. It never ends. In fact, the definition of the economy, okay, there are many of them, but this is one of those classic ones. An economist friend of mine told me that the definition of the economy is the science which tries to satisfy the desire, the infinite desire of mankind with finite resources of the world, to use the finite resources of the world to satisfy the infinite desires of men. And the first question is, how can you satisfy something which is infinite? Impossible. The key is to find balance between that which I need and things that I want. But anyway, we started off from another point to understand our senses. But we also need to understand our weaknesses, because what takes away our inner peace? What is it? Fear, anxiety, dissatisfaction, attachment, anger, jealousy, etc., etc. There are inner states. What we see, what we hear, and so on, mainly those two senses, influence our emotions greatly, no? And it depends how we live them. For example, for most of us, when we see news about the world, what's the sentiment that we develop? Fear, anger, hate even. Lama Michel, he liked watching the news. There was a period in which he watched it almost 24 hours a day. I used to say, come on, Rinpoche. Come on, Rinpoche. The news is always the same, again and again. And he said, well, I'm not watching the news. I said, okay, why have you got the news on? I use it as a base for my prayers. I see what happens in the world. Things they only show the horrible things. And every time I see an image, I pray for the people there. Therefore, in his case, instead of having his fear generated, he did to generate compassion, to pray for those people, to pray for those situations. This is an example that depends how we relate to things. But if we know that a certain thing brings us anxiety, it's useless to go there and repeat it and repeat it and repeat. Let's protect ourselves a bit. Let's protect our senses. Lama Michel Rinpoche, he put sacred image everywhere in his house, apart from the bathroom. Only there weren't any. And I asked him once why this was, and he said, because everything that you see leaves an imprint on your mind, even if you see it in passing. So therefore, if you see objects that have a deep meaning, leave a different imprint on your mind. Therefore, it becomes very important for us to use our senses well, to use them, which means to cultivate that the characteristics that we want to cultivate: love, patience, gratitude, peace, respect, and so on. And to try to avoid the senses, to cultivate and reinforce anger, jealousy, fear, anxiety, etc. Because at the end of the day, our senses have a double function. On one side, what I see, what I hear, etc., influences, it awakens an emotion, one emotion rather than another. For example, you hear a sound, the bell. The sound goes into my ear. There's a hearing consciousness and connects to my mind, and then I attribute a meaning to that sound. And together with that, there is an emotion, aversion, whatever. On the other side, when an emotion arises, it doesn't stay there. We react to that. We can react. We can do it in three ways. Physically, we can react physically or verbally. We speak through that emotion, or mentally, we enter into some kind of dialogue. When we do one of these three things, Okay, the body's stronger than the word and the mind. We reinforce and we nourish that emotion. If I feel love and I take a decision based on love, I reinforce the sentiment of love. But if I feel anger and I manifest that physically or verbally, or I enter into a dialogue with that mentally, I reinforce anger. If I'm sad and I act out of sadness, or get into dialogue with sadness, I reinforce sadness. Obviously, we shouldn't ignore our emotions and pretend they're not there, because that's another way of reinforcing them. We need to embrace them, but not follow them. Not block them and not follow them. But it's important to understand that our senses, our way of the way we manifest ourselves so externally has a weight, has importance. What we see, does it leave an imprint on our mind or not? Of course. Even subliminal messages leave an imprint on our mind. These are, I don't know if they're still used. I imagine that they are. But for example, the other day I learned something quite shocking. I was doing research to choose screens for the center where to put the program at the center, because there's a problem. Because we had to print it, and then it's not the printed version was never the same. The program's impermanent. Anyway, I decided to get some screens where the program is updated in real time. And I go into a site that sells these screens, and there was a particular model, and I look at it, and anybody can buy this model where you put your publicity, video, or fixed images, and but it incorporates a camera, and this camera projects onto the person watching the screen and monitors all the facial expressions, and you can tell from the camera the emotions that the looker is going through, his reaction to the advertisement. And this is something that anybody can buy. Now, why am I saying this? Because every tiny image influences us. For example, advertising. There's a study that was done once where there were, I've heard this, that there are advertisements with images inserted with telecameras, and this telecamera can pick up where the eye falls during the advertisement. And you can tell from this, for example, if a person has homosexual tendencies or not, and that would change the type of advertising. What I want to say is that when we receive an image, however subtle it might be, it leaves an imprint, and we react. The first time was subliminal messages were used, was even more insidious. At the beginning of television advertising, they put so let's say there are 30 frames. Let's say we take a text. Every 4 frames, and not with continuity. Let's just say. So. Okay, if you change some of those frames, the mind doesn't pick it up. but the brain picks it up. I haven't seen this in detail, but friends who work in cinema said Kubrick used this in his film, in one of his films. There's a scene, final scene, where there's a man seated in an electric chair, and the scene. So the scene transmitted more fear than otherwise would have, more fear than it would have done otherwise. And you don't understand why you're so frightened, because superimposed was an image of a skeleton, but in a subliminal way. You see the man, but actually the skeleton, the mind picked up the skeleton. For example, they've also they've asked people what message, what was there, and they didn't know. But then when they asked what the message was, they knew. But apart from all that, I also remember they put some subliminal images in Roger Rabbit. It's a cartoon character. There was a lot of controversy about it. There was Roger Rabbit. There was the beautiful female. There was a female character who was very sexy, and there was some subliminal images of this character nude, and this was for children. So even if I see something for a fraction of a second, it still has an image on my mind. Not to speak of what's printed. Does that leave an image on the mind? Absolutely, yes. If that weren't so, there wouldn't exist advertising. Why does advertising work? Because when I see something, it leaves an imprint on me. One of the clearest examples of this, once, many years ago, I was in Brazil, and here we can understand a few things. So I'm talking about 12 years ago. At a certain point, I see some advertising on television. It was strange, because the advertisements are usually short, but this was a really long one. It was wonderful images of nature, forest, birds, the Amazon, beautiful images of nature and wonderful music. And at the end, what did they show? Just the logo of Shell, the oil company. And that was the end of the advertisement. So in the middle of the images of the Amazon, there was the logo of Shell. And our mind works on the basis of association. I see beautiful images and I see the logo. So when I see the logo, I associate it with the images. And this is what we do. Publicity, advertising works, and this actually works. I don't know if it has ever happened to you to go to Instagram or Facebook and to remain in samadhi, a state of unequivocal meditation. So instead of moving the mind, there's a movement of your finger scrolling. These images, the images that we see, do they leave an imprint or not? Yes. The worst thing is that our mind reacts so easily to stimuli that after a while, if we don't have those stimuli, we feel there's something missing. Therefore, One of the greatest problems that we have is anxiety. I don't know how many. No, you don't need to raise your hand, but how many of us are here to take anti-anxiety medicine? How many of us? And among people we know, how many of those take it? An absolutely astounding number of people. But why? Because we're anxious and that's it? Or because we stimulate a part of us that generates anxiety? And one of these, and part of this is due to the fast pace of life and the bombarding of images and stimuli that we have. Even if I send you a message and you don't reply within half an hour, it means that you don't like me anymore. I remember once when I was small, my parents complained. My parents complained that the house phone never stopped ringing, and then they took cell phones. I said, "Well, why are you getting cell phones if?" And what do we do now with the cell phone? We have to be ever present to do or react instead of relaxing for a while. But the worst thing is that we create this addiction to constant information, to be bombarded with information. We need to know what's happening. But the question I ask, and I ask each of you to ask yourselves, is to enter into contact with information in this way. In this way, what kind of mental state does it cause? Relaxation, calm? Oh, I'm relaxed because I heard this. Anxiety, attachment, envy, fear. It's important to observe this, because at the end, it's our life. It depends on us. I'm not saying we should close ourselves from the world, but we should consume. And I mean, I don't mean to consume, I don't mean buying. I mean the images that I consume, the sounds that I consume, what I consume with taste, because we have some awareness and what we eat, no? And we understand the influence it has on our body and mind. There have been so many studies that have shown the relationship between the quantity of sugar that we eat and cancer. We know that what we eat influences the mind. Just look at coffee, for example. Sugar. Everything we eat has an influence on our mental state, emotional mental state. We have a bit of awareness, but what we consume is not only eating and drinking. It's what we see, what we listen to, what we touch, smells, and so on. Everything object of our senses that we come into contact with has a very strong influence on our being in general. But we have free will. We can choose. This is good for me, I want more. This is bad for me, I'm going to put it apart. The difficulty is when something, the problem is when something is bad for us, but we have some kind of addiction. For example, I'm sorry if I say this, for example, the way we use social media. It's not a specific, it's not the social media itself. It's for example, the telephone. I realized this for myself. I realized that I started picking up the phone to look at the news that I'd already seen. but not because I wanted to read the news or because there was something I should know. It was simply the impulse to pick up the object and have a new stimulus. And when I didn't do it, there was a part of me inside that was something missing. And this is a clear sign to say, okay, that's enough. I created a space in the morning and the evening to read the news, and that's it. Why? For example, why I don't use social media? Because I know my weaknesses. The few times I took Instagram or Facebook, you go into samadhi in bad sense of the word. I'm very curious by nature. I see every video until the end. I look at everything. I can be there for 30 hours without stopping, just scrolling. And life goes by. I have my own problem that if I listen to a piece of music, it stays in my head and I can't get rid of it. One of the worst was that for what was there's a song about sharks. Anyway, so it's so ridiculous. I went to listen. I to listen to the song of the sharks, and ridiculous. Even when particularly when I was eating something crunchy, the rhythm of that song came out, and it was terrible. I couldn't get rid of this song from my head. I suggest you don't listen to this song of the sharks. It's nice. It's cute. It's easy to learn, but I learned it immediately. But the problem is after that, you can't get rid of it from your mind. It's somebody I know in India. He came to the monastery. He wanted to do a retreat. He wanted to stay in a retreat in the monastery for his life. He said, first of all, you need to study well because you need to know things first. And he made him study for 12 years. When he finished, and then after that, he went to the master and said, I'd like to meditate. So he studied everything. He gave him all the instructions on the gradual path, etc. He found a family that would host him in a nice place where he could dedicate himself to retreat. So he went off to do his retreat. After a few weeks, he came by, and my master said, "What are you doing? I thought you were supposed to do a life retreat. What are you doing here?" He said, I feel bad. I feel as though I'm tricking people around me that give me people who are looking after me as if I'm doing something special. It's a farce. I'm ashamed of myself. He said, why? Because I did everything you said, and I sit to meditate, and the minute I try to concentrate, I start getting in my mind all the scenes from all the Indian films. He studied really well. But he had developed in the meantime a passion for Bollywood and what you do in a hidden way, which remains much more strongly within you. So he used to sneak off and go to the cinema. And sometimes he used to go to see Bollywood film. And sometimes he got into trouble sometimes because the discipline master was waiting outside the cinema. But he saw so many films in a hidden way. And the imprint was there. Oh, how much less than meditate on bodhicitta. I just had all these images from the films in his head. My master laughed and laughed a lot and then gave him other indications. And then he went actually, and then he actually went off and didn't come back for a long time. So this is just to show that the images that we receive have an enormous effect on us. But what is being awoken is fear and anger. Then that's really worrying, because we're a bit strange. Because if there's an image that frightens me and I get paranoia, it makes me feel a bit paranoid, what do? We tend to look for more images of the same. So if somebody's frightened of something, they talk only about that thing. What happens with that? It increases. In the same way, well, we should choose what we eat. We should choose also what we see, what we hear, what we touch, where we go. Our senses are very important for us because they awaken certain states and reinforce certain emotional states. And because of this, my advice is let's try to eliminate and to avoid our addiction to sensorial stimuli. Social media, it's okay, cell phone's okay, news is okay, but as an instrument, not as an end in itself. I don't know if that's clear. I must, if I need to communicate something, I communicate it. The other day, I saw a scene which kind of struck me. Somebody was doing something wonderful. I won't go into detail, but it was a really nice moment. And at a certain point, and then there was and then I saw that they'd been taking a film of it for Instagram or Facebook, and this person said, "I'm going to publish what I did." I just felt really bad that he was filming this, because you find yourself doing something really wonderful and special, but the person isn't even there. And it's the reason he's doing it is not even for that thing itself, because he's doing it because he wants to transmit that image of this wonderful thing and get some kind of gain from this. And deep down, I do it because I want the approval of others and not for the thing in itself. Fame, recognition. The people say how good I am. Well, what does it change how many likes you have? How many likes you have? It's like in Facebook, it's like Monopoly, as a friend of mine said. Because you get likes, no likes. If I'm doing something, I need to live that moment and be present. And not do it because afterwards I'll get this and the other. It's fine if you do something nice and you decide to share it with a few people. But it's kind of insidious, the thing. We need to look inside what happens to us. Because that's the point. I don't know if that's clear. Therefore, let's remember that the doors of our senses direct our mind. And it's possible to have a strong, stable mind, which is calm, pacific, peaceful, which remains that way even regardless of the images that it receives. But we have to reach that state. We're not there yet. Until we haven't got that state, it's important to us to recognize our own weaknesses. And obviously, if I find myself, And if I have to look at something that has a sudden effect on me, if I have to absolutely do it, I try to protect myself and and use my senses to direct my to use my senses in a way that will help me. Because if we look at, we've come from a period in which there was just one subject that people spoke about, which was COVID. First of all, it was COVID, then it was the vaccine, and now what's the argument now? The subject? It's war. Without taking anything away from COVID or of the war or the severity of war, without going into detail on these subjects. But is there anything else in life apart from these things? But how much inner space is taken up with these things? How much time of our life, through our thoughts, our words, what we see, is consumed by all this, and life goes by. We need to remain informed. We need to take conscious decisions. So you need to inform yourself well, not just to read the titles, the headlines here and there. You really need to understand something, to hear this opinion, that opinion, and that you see that the truth remains between the truths. And we influence each other. Because, for example, if I talk to you about... If I talk to you about a friend who's done something bad, what do we do when we do? What do we do if there's somebody I like and he's done something bad? When I tell somebody else, we try to justify it. But somebody we don't like does something good, what do we do? He did that, yeah, it was good, but that's already in our human nature. So when we receive information, we have to remember that the truth is found between the truths. And not to let ourselves be manipulated so easily. We need to study, understand, to go in depth, to arrive at our own opinions. But in the meantime, there are so many other aspects of our life which are important. We need to live life in the best way possible. Therefore, let's choose consciously how to use our senses, remembering that our senses are an instrument for our inner state, and if I want is an inner state of peace, I need to use my senses to bring me to that state, to help me to diminish emotions that are harmful, and cultivate those which are good for me. Okay? This is what I wanted to bring today. I wanted to share with you today. And to do it with joy, with awareness. Because there's the possibility to live with or without awareness. The best thing, the obvious thing is to be able to receive any information, but to maintain in a balance. But we need to, we're not there yet. As Lama Michel Rinpoche, he had it. Until we're not there, we need to choose what information we receive, how. We don't need to say this, I don't want it. But we need to listen to and see with a bit of discernment, and to be aware of what kind of emotion it generates when we see something. And for example, when we see suffering, we try not to develop hate, but rather compassion, this is another subject, but when we see violence, let's remember that we recite, may all beings be free from suffering and from its causes. When two people, one who reacts with violence and the other one who is subject to this, the person who is subject to it, he should be free from the suffering, and the person who inflicts the suffering should be free from the causes. So both the victim and the perpetrator, both of them are objects of compassion. And to have compassion, if you have compassion for somebody, it doesn't mean to say you approve of what they're doing. You just wish that person is happy and free from his own ignorance, selfishness, anger, and that he live in peace with himself and others. That's what loving means. And we need to be careful. And I've said this so many times, but let me repeat it again without going into details, because it's already late. But when we find ourselves in these situations, there's a certain kind of polarization that takes place, not now with the war. It happened with COVID, with the vaccine. Where there was attraction on one side, aversion on the other. I don't like you because you made this choice, because you manifest this instead of something else. Because you're wrong. I believe you're wrong. But if you're wrong, I should take care of you. I should try to look after you, not to go against you. The person who reacts with violence is accepted and guided, embraced and guided, not punished. Well, maybe we don't personally have the means to punish people, but in our mind we do it with hatred. And then we do something that's a bit childish. Sorry if I say this. We have the tendency to create, and we tend to create these ideals of personifications of good and bad. But really, I can't live anything that is not the result of causes. So a country goes through what is collective karma, taking away nothing from the importance of each to the importance of the action of each individual person. But the solution is in the thing taken as a whole. But what I wanted to touch on today is to cultivate compassion when we see violence. Instead of reacting with hatred, we should rather manifest our hatred towards the violence, not against the religion or the person. I can say this, I believe this to be stupid, and I don't like this action. I can say it. To eat an enormous quantity of sugar is wrong, because it's bad for health, mental state. But that doesn't mean to say I have to hate people who eat a lot of sugar. And not because I love you. And doesn't mean to say that I'm indulgent with you. Say, okay, you eat sugar, it's okay. I can condemn an action, a certain kind of thought, a certain kind of action, but not to condemn the person, people, a nation, or a race. I don't know if that's clear. But principally, within us, we must cultivate, we need to create compassion. So we need to direct our compassion towards, so that the person be free of suffering, but also free of the causes of suffering, such as anger, hatred. Because if I just say, if I just pray that may all beings be free of suffering, but we add, and also its causes. So that includes the perpetrator. So we need to put this into practice. Otherwise, what happens is we're here, we're praying, we do our meditation, and we say, can all beings be free of suffering and its causes? And may they have happiness and its causes? And we look at the news a moment later and we say, oh, this one did this, oh, what a horrible person. Look at these, look how horrible they are. And then we generate hate towards these people. It's right, let me repeat, to recognize what the actions, behaviors, points of view that we believe to be violent, that are harmful, and they should be condemned. They should be opposed. But if we need to judge the person and not people. And that is true also for ourselves and people around us. We mustn't go against anybody, but against actions, choices, ways of reacting and of being, but not against people. Is that clear? Well, obviously we need to train ourselves in this internally. This is what I wanted to talk about today. Let's try to the best of our capacities to use our senses well with a state of balance, love, and whichever context we find ourselves in. And we can say we have a possibility to train ourselves. We have a lot of information, but something that always has helped me and still helps me is an inner sentiment, that feeling that doesn't matter what happens, we have the means to confront it, no matter what happens. And somebody comes to me with fear of illness or whatever. What I believe is that we have the fortune, that we have the means to confront any situation. So anything that should happen, we have the means to confront it. In the meantime, we should live with the best attitude to live each moment to the best of our capabilities. So the important thing is not what happens, is how we live the moment. Okay. Let's make our dedications.
Jetsun alame kutse rapten chin namkara trinle chokchur gepadang losan tempe drume sasumgi drove munsela tatu ne gyurchi kewa kuntu yanda lamadang dralme cheki pela longche ching sadan lamge yente rabzone dorje change koba nyurtobasho nimo dele tsendele nime kunyan dele ninsen taktu delekpe koncho sumke chinge lobo koncho sumke ngodrubotsol koncho sumke trashisho all'alba o al tramonto, di notte o durante il giorno, possano i tre gioielli concederci le loro benedizioni, possano aiutarci ad ottenere tutte le realizzazioni e cospargere il sentiero della nostra vita con molti segni di buon auspicio. Buona giornata a tutti.